All right, you primitive screwheads. Listen up. See this? This is my boomstick!
It's real. Doom: The Dark Ages is the next game in the franchise. Officially revealed at the 2024 Xbox Showcase, The Dark Ages is a medieval-inspired prequel to the events of Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. While we only got a short gameplay trailer with the 2025 release window, the small glimpse we were given contains a wealth of information that I want to go over. Since this is a new Doom game, the best place to start is with the weapons. The first weapon we get a peek at is All Reliable itself, the Super Shotgun. While visually similar to its Eternal counterpart, this SSG is a different beast entirely. The most obvious change is the lack of a meat hook. While it may be something that we unlock later, its absence is an indication that id Software may have moved away from Eternal's controversial platforming segments. Aside from that, the biggest change that the SSG has gone through is in its method of action. That's right, folks. It's no longer a break action double barrel. Now, it's a lever action double barrel. We're Terminator 2 now, baby. Damage-wise, it looks like the SSG is as powerful as ever, though it's obviously been turned up a bit for the sake of this trailer. Killing a Mancubus with one shot? I don't think so. Speaking of walking tubs of lard, let's talk about the Mancubus real quick. It's the first demon we get a good look at, and the game's new art direction is on full display. High-tech cybernetics have taken a backseat, and now the Electrocounts are at the wheel.
I am supreme!
Welcome to the grimdark fantasy of Doom. If anything, this guy and a few of the other demons we'll talk about wouldn't look too out of place in Warhammer Fantasy. The design isn't a huge departure from the one in Doom Eternal, but the dark metal bits give me an H.R. Giger vibe that I enjoy. It would have been cool to see the more biomechanical Mancubus from 2016 make a return, but this one does a good job of conveying the grimmer tone that the game is going for, so I'll give it points for that. Let's move on. If the Super Shotgun acts as Doomguy's sword, then it's only fitting that he has a shield to go with it. A saw shield at that. Someone in a senior position must be a huge Captain America fan because they said, "Get this man a shield," and everyone took them seriously. That's not a complaint, mind you, but it's the first thing that my pop culture rotten brain thought of when I first saw this. It makes sense though. Since this game is going to have a stronger emphasis on melee combat, it's logical to give the player a means to counter it. The twist is to turn this tool into something that can be used defensively and offensively, which is something that they demonstrate in the trailer. Of particular note is this segment where Doomguy parries an attack from a Hell Knight. If you were paying attention, you would have noticed the green aura emanating from the Hell Knight's fists as it slashed at the player. So much like a marauder at an intersection, green means go. We're a FromSoft game now. It honestly never occurred to me what id Software might do to bring a chainsaw into a medieval setting, but now that I've seen the saw shield, it all makes sense. An awesome addition through and through. Circling back to the Hell Knight, it looks like it'll continue to be a rushdown enemy like it was in 2016 and Eternal. The overall model is the same as previous iterations with some additional detailing on the skin that looks like stripes. I'm a big fan of the Hell Knight's Doom 3 design, and it's great to see it continue to be iterated on 20 years later. My only wish is that we could see the classic-inspired design that was sketched out during Eternal's concept phase. That design goes hard, and I really want to see it in game one day. Before we move on, it's time to talk about a 2-for-1 special that the Saw Shield gets to chew through. The Hell Soldier and the Unwilling. 2 low-tier enemies returning from the previous games. Nothing much to add here as they look unchanged gameplay-wise, but I do appreciate that the Hell Soldiers have a new design that's appropriate for the setting. It would have been cool to have a new design for the Unwilling, but since their role is to play cannon fodder, it's not really that big of a deal. Let's talk about the star of the trailer. That distinction, at least in my opinion, goes to the Skull Crusher.
Sun Tzu once said, "It is only one who is thoroughly acquainted with the evils of war that can thoroughly understand the profitable way of carrying it on." Hence the old saying, "Why waste perfectly good lead when the bones of your enemies are just as good?" How did Games Workshop not think of this already?
10 out of 10. It's the best thing that I've seen since I found an uncensored picture of SCP-096. I've got it right here, actually. Take a look. Next up on the block is the Accelerator. Now this one surprised me. Obviously, the Night Sentinels have energy-based weapons, but I wasn't expecting to see what I believed was a different model of Doom Eternal's plasma gun to be in this game. Turns out it's not. In this video from GameSpot, Hugo Martin describes it as a shock rifle that spits out electricity like an SMG. So basically a lightning gun that shoots individual bolts instead of a continuous beam. It's worth noting that the multiplayer for Doom 2016 had a lightning gun that functioned like its counterparts in Quake, but this seems to be a more original take on that concept. My only complaint is that the outward design is too similar to the plasma gun from Doom Eternal. This is just my 2 cents, but I'd recommend going back to the drawing board and coming up with something that's more visually distinct. Let's move on to some more baddies like the Revenant. Ah, the Revenant. My favorite agitated skeleton is positively haunting me with his immaculate drip. Oh, and what's this? A sickle? Bro must have just gotten back from tormenting Stalin for the day. The Revenant is one of my all-time favorite enemies in gaming, and I love what the art team has put together here. The projectiles it fires being flaming skulls is just the icing on the cake. For me personally, this is a huge upgrade from how the Revenant looked in Doom Eternal. That design's fine and all, but it never grabbed me like its 2016 counterpart. That guy looked like a prototype going through a genuine psychotic episode, while Eternals was a plain Jane production model doing its best to keep the madness at bay. This new guy is just the Grim Reaper, and I love it. I want to go on a brief tangent and congratulate Emerson Tung on his recent promotion to art director for id Software. His work on the franchise over the years has been incredible, and it's awesome to see him at the helm now. If you like Emerson's work and want to support him directly, you can find links to his upcoming mech art book called Tankhead in the description. It's coming out next month, and it's sure to be a banger. Links to the other incredible artists that work at id Software can be found below as well. Show them all some love. I'll know if you don't. Back to the new enemies. Before us is a man and his dog. In Lalelulelo of an official name for this duo, I'm going to refer to them collectively as the Beast Rider. It's difficult to parse out details about this guy due to how short and dark this clip is, but I did notice the horns on his helmet and got to thinking. This may be a Night Sentinel who sided with Hell and eventually got corrupted into a Marauder. That would be pretty cool if that turns out to be the case. Aside from that, I enjoy the idea of a 2-part enemy where both the rider and the mount are dangers you have to contend with. If you take out the rider first, then the mount gets a new moveset and vice versa. Hopefully that's the case with this enemy. The last thing worth mentioning is the waves of energy that the rider shoots out at the player. It's obvious that the green wave is parryable in some fashion, but it remains to be seen if it's an attack that we can just deflect to the side or aim back at the source. Another thing that I noticed while scrubbing through this footage is that the rider is casting these waves of energy with a bow. Maybe that's a weapon we'll get to use later on. Nothing else to say on this front, let's continue. The final gun we'll talk about today is something that looks like it can shoot 7, 8, maybe even 9-inch long nails that are capable of pinning enemies to a solid surface. It's called the Rail Spike. Like Quake's lightning gun, I've always felt that a nail gun type of weapon would work well in Doom. With this game's medieval inspirations, a nail gun type weapon makes more sense than ever before. I'm curious to see what role it'll take in the player's arsenal, but at first glance, I'm going to guess that it's going to act as our long-range precision weapon, like the Gauss cannon. I could be wrong though, but that's the vibe that I got from it. Speaking of nailing things, the classic Imp is back and he's looking better than ever. Just look at this guy's power stance. Ditching the fast and nimble design for a return to form is just another indication of id Software's plan to take the series back to its roots. I give this design a light to strong 10 out of 10. Up next is a big guy who's drawn some well-earned attention. At the time of recording, we have no idea what this demon is called, but sharp-eyed individuals have noticed similarities between it and one of the coolest demons introduced in Doom Eternal. Yes indeed, by all accounts, this is what the Doom Hunter looked like before it became more machine than monster. The overall size and shape of the head and torso are a strong match between the two. Couple this with minor detailing like the bony protrusions coming out of the shoulders, and you've got yourself a case that Vinnie Gambini would go to bat for. The big wrench in this theory is the four-armed corpse that appeared as an environmental trigger in the cultist base level. That may end up being something that gets retconned, but it's worth pointing out. These Agadons, as they're called in the Codex, were described by Hugo as an arch-enemy of the Slayer at QuakeCon 2018. That implies there being some history between the two, and I expect we'll see it touched on in the Dark Ages. Rounding up the weapons is the flail. I got some serious Castlevania vibes from this thing when I first saw it, and yes, I do mean that as a compliment. Chain whips are hella cool, and it's great to see their larger cousin make an appearance in a Doom game. It would have been easy for them to reuse the Doom Blade from Eternal, so I appreciate the extra effort they've put in to make something new. In the clip that you're watching now, I noticed that Doom Guy dishes out a Duke Nukem-style mighty foot kick against this big-horned goof. I'm not sure if it's part of a combo with the flail or not, but I liked it. Same with the spiked gauntlet. A nice homage to the spiked knuckles from classic Doom. Assuming that the Dark Ages follows the same conventions as the previous games, I think the weapon assignments will be as follows. The saw shield in place of a chainsaw, the skull crusher in place of a machine gun, the accelerator in place of a plasma gun, the rail spike in place of a rail gun, and the flail as the primary melee attack. I can't wait to see what this game's version of the BFG looks like. Before we move on to the rest of the demons though, let's talk about the Atlan mech a little bit. The great thing about Doom is that in many ways it's an interactive love letter to the kinds of media that the developers are fans of. Classic Doom was made by people who loved action movies and heavy metal. The people making modern Doom are proudly continuing that tradition by supplementing Army of Darkness with Gundam. Anyone who watched the no-clip documentary about Doom 2016 would know that Hugo Martin worked on Pacific Rim as a concept artist. He was one of the primary brains behind the film's iconic Jaegers, and admits to being a guy who likes to geek over minute details on internet wikis. So of course he's going to put a mech in a Doom game. Those mechs that we saw sprinkled all over the place in Doom Eternal were just little whiffs of what they were cooking in the background. I'm interested to see how much control we'll actually have over this thing. I'm expecting a short segment like the one at the end of Gears of War 4, but we'll just have to wait and see. Speaking of cooking, let's talk about dragons real quick. Arguably the biggest addition to the roster of monsters is one that isn't even a demon or an enemy. I remember people wishing that they could control the dragon that appears in the Ancient Gods Part 2. I know because I was one of them. id Software have heard our cries and delivered unto us what looks like to be peak gaming. That said, the gameplay that was shown in the trailer doesn't offer much in the way of information. It's obvious that we'll have some level of control during these segments, but to what extent remains unknown. Hopefully we'll be able to dive bomb and strafe the armies of hell to our heart's content, complete with a Ju-87 style siren. Now, of all the possible returning monsters, the one that I least expected to see is the Arachnotron. I mean, come on, he's got Tron in his name. That's his whole shtick. Seeing a fleshier interpretation of this guy took me for a loop, and I'm not sure what to think because of that. On the one hand, Arachnotrons are cool, and it's nice to see what they look like in this setting, but on the other hand, I feel like this may have been a missed opportunity to create something entirely original. I'll reserve final judgment until I get a chance to play the game, but until then, this freak show is on notice. Now you know things are bad when even Duke Nukem enemies are crossing over to a different IP because they got sick and tired of waiting on Randy Pitchford to come back from the hair gel factory. What other conclusion is there? These are Octobrains. Beyond that, we definitively know who let the dogs out because sheesh, this absolute madman is strutting his little tentacle feet for everyone and their grandma to see. All jokes aside, we didn't get to see these little goobers up close, so it's difficult for me to say anything beyond that comparison. Now the last enemy that we get a clear picture of is a returning one from Doom Eternal, a Titan. While it's cool that we'll be able to go toe-to-toe with these guys using the Atlan mech and Mecha Dragon, I do have one complaint. I think it's a bit of a wasted opportunity to reuse the same model from Eternal for the simple fact that they're going to be playing a bigger role this time around. The Eternal model is fine, but again, let's take the opportunity to spice things up a bit. Maybe that'll change by release, but if it doesn't, we'll at least have a big baddie to go Power Rangers on, and what child of the 90s can say no to that? All in all, I really enjoyed what was shown in this trailer. I managed to go in with my expectations in check and was not disappointed. Subsequent information from interviews has gotten me even more excited, particularly where Hugo discussed the more grounded, tank-like approach that the team is going for. That said, there are two concerns that I'd like to touch on. The first comes from some of the language being used to describe the game. The official description for the Dark Ages describes it as the epic cinematic origin story of the Doomslayer's rage. Now, in all fairness, this is a fairly generic description designed to hype up the game. More than likely, it was something written by someone from the Bethesda Softworks marketing team and is innocent enough on its own. My concern comes from Hugo using similar language in interviews. He could just be reiterating some of the talking points that were prepared for him ahead of time, but I can't ignore the fact that cinematic origin story makes my skin crawl. This is just my opinion, but I feel like the story that they've been cooking up really jumped the shark after the Ancient Gods Part 2. Now, I know it's silly to complain about the story in a franchise like Doom, but if it's going to be there, I prefer it to be simple. I don't need any justification to rip and tear demons apart. I'm playing a Doom game, that's what I'm here to do. I don't need to know how or why Doom Guy feels the way he does about hell and its occupants. I don't need a tragic backstory about a wife or kid that he lost to be the motivation behind his actions. Doom Guy going berserko mode because the demons killed his pet rabbit is just fine. It's stupid and it's perfect because of that. Speaking as a former Halo fanboy, I really don't want to see Doom go down the same road that they did. One of the reasons I fell in love with this series is because it doesn't take itself seriously. It said as much in the No-Clip documentary. Keep it fun, keep it silly, don't pull the curtain back on something that should remain hidden, and not everything needs an explanation. Irregardlessly, I'm still interested to see where the story goes. I just hope that it doesn't go off the rails again. The second thing I want to talk about isn't so much a concern with the game as it is with the wider community. The fallout between Mick Gordon and id Software has been a dark cloud hanging over the community for over 4 years now with no end in sight. Regardless of whose side you're on, the whole situation just sucks. I've been a huge fan of Mick's work since Killer Instinct. Ever since then, it's been banger after banger, and it kills me that we'll probably never get to hear his version of Doom Eternal's soundtrack. What's available now is great, but knowing that it could have been even better is plain old sad to think about. There's no doubt in my mind that if given the opportunity, he would have killed it on the Dark Ages. With all that said, I don't want to see the community direct any of their frustration at his replacement. At the time of recording, no official statement has been given regarding who will be composing the Dark Ages, but the music used in the trailer is very reminiscent of Andrew Hulshult's style. And that makes sense. Andrew is no stranger to Doom. He and David Levy both did an amazing job with the soundtrack for the Ancient Gods, and I challenge anyone to say otherwise. David has confirmed that he's not involved with the Dark Ages, so unless something changes, it looks like Andrew will be handling things on his own. If he is the composer, then I know for a fact that he can make a great soundtrack that absolutely shreds. He's done it time and time again, and there's no reason to think that he won't do the same here. I'm not asking anyone to change how they feel about what happened with Mick, but I am asking that we give Andrew a fair shake. If you don't vibe with his style, then it is what it is, but it's not an excuse to hold something that he wasn't involved in over his head. He's a great composer, a fellow Doom fan, and we owe it to him to make him feel welcome. Like a lot of you, I hope that there will be a day when id Software and Mick Gordon are able to make amends and give us the true version of the Doom Eternal soundtrack. But as I said earlier, there's no indication that this will happen anytime soon, if at all. I've made my peace with that fact and am choosing to move on. If you hadn't had a chance to listen to any of Andrew's previous work, then you're doing yourself a disservice. I've linked a couple of my favorites of his in the description, and I highly recommend you give them a listen. Understandably, the game's reveal has generated a lot of debate within the community, mainly around the fact that this is a new Doom game instead of a new Quake game. For those who don't know, the original concept for Quake was based on the D&D campaigns that the members of id Software played during their Commander Keen days. What started as a purely fantasy RPG turned into the legendary first-person shooter we know today. Knights, castles, and stained glass windows all make an appearance in the base game. There's even a dragon that serves as the final boss in the Dissolution of Eternity expansion. Military sci-fi, gothic fantasy, and Lovecraft. That's Quake. And yes, I'm throwing the Strogg into the sci-fi category since that makes things easier. So with all that said, why is Doom encroaching on what many consider to be Quake's domain? I've seen some speculation that the Dark Ages started out as a Quake game but got rebranded at some point so that Xbox and Bethesda could capitalize on Doom's stronger position as an intellectual property. Thankfully, Hugo set the record straight in the GameSpot interview. We were planning to make this game from the beginning, the arc. We've always thought of it that way. So the Slayer's Testaments, in the first age, in the first battle, when the shadows first lengthened, this is a game about that period. This is further backed up by the interview that Hugo did with Polygon back in 2021. For better or worse, Quake just doesn't seem to be on id's radar at the moment. But that may not be the case forever. Thinking about it some more, I think this detour into medieval Doom may be serving a dual purpose. First, we get to see how Mr. Doom goes from being just a guy to being the Slayer, taking the rebooted storyline from a duology and turning it into a trilogy. Second, it may be using this as the foundation for the development of a new Quake title. Game development cycles have only grown longer and more expensive in recent years, and as a result, greater emphasis is being placed on established properties that have a lower risk of failure. Despite my affection for it, the latest title in the Quake franchise, Quake Champions, didn't set the world on fire. Unwanted gameplay mechanics, confusing marketing, and half-hearted support from the publisher meant that it was never going to take off. If not for the excellent remasters of the first two games from Night Dive Studios, then Quake as a franchise would be deader than dead. If the Dark Ages meets or exceeds its projected sales and review metrics, then it can be used as a bargaining chip to go all in on a new Quake title. To help sweeten the pot, certain assets made for the Dark Ages can be reused where applicable to reduce costs. Another card that can be played comes in the form of MachineGames. Many of the company's founders started their careers by modding Quake. When the team became part of ZeniMax Media, they asked for the chance to work on a new game in the series. For whatever reason, this request was denied, and they were offered the Wolfenstein franchise instead. They have developed a few episodes for Quake 1 and 2 over the past few years, though. Dimension of the Past and Dimension of the Machine for Quake 1, and Call of the Machine for Quake 2. During the Indiana Jones presentation from earlier this year, a whiteboard can be seen with the Quake Q symbol and the words Quake 6 written above it. While there's only 4 numbered Quake games, it's likely that Quake Champions is internally referred to as Quake 5. Yes, I know about Quake Live and Quake Wars, but I'm going to pull an Occam's razor on this one. Outside of id Software, MachineGames is the only studio that exclusively uses the modern iterations of the id Tech engine. With that in mind, a new Quake game could feasibly be a cooperative effort between the two studios. Both have collaborated with other studios in the past, and id has a team in Frankfurt, Germany that focuses on id Tech development. This could make things easier as travel and communication between Sweden and Germany would be less of a hassle than between Sweden and Texas. This is all wishful thinking on my part, of course. I love Quake, and I want to see it make a return like everyone else. I'm hopeful that it'll get the love and attention it deserves one day, whether that be from id Software or MachineGames. One more thing before I wrap things up. If anyone from id happens to watch this video, give yourselves a pat on the back. I could tell from the GameSpot interview that Hugo and Marty are both exhausted, and I can only imagine how the rest of you are feeling. I've not personally worked in game development, but I'm familiar with what it's like to work at a job that comes with a lot of expectations surrounding deadlines and performance metrics. That in of itself can be incredibly overwhelming, and I can only imagine how much worse it can get when it's coupled with aggravating fan interactions and the anxieties of working in an unstable industry. It's not worth much, but just know that I appreciate everything you're doing. What you've shown so far is fantastic, and I can't wait to see more. I'll be going to QuakeCon this year, and if I get the chance, I'd love to meet you face to face and talk some Doom. Just take each day at a time, and you'll be through the finish line before you know it. That's going to be it for this video. I've compiled all the sources and references I used in a GitHub gist link that you can find in the description. I'll be back sometime next month with a review of Fallen Aces. So until that time, stay safe, and always remember to look both ways before crossing a chicken. You just never know.